My name is Matthew Kleven. I'm one of the reference librarians here at the York County Library in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And we're very lucky to have, again, Jennifer Shackelford, who is one of the park rangers for the Mammoth Cave in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. We have worked together before in a program several years ago when I was at a library in North Carolina. And I thought she did such a great job that I wanted to do a repeat command performance. So we're lucky to have her back again. Let me give a little bio of her. But she is the Environmental Education Coordinator at the Mammoth Cave National Park. And she is lucky enough to teach local Kentucky youth, as well as people from around the country, about environmental education and how it relates to Mammoth Cave National Park. She grew up in the Mammoth Cave region and found her love of the park on her 4th grade field trip to the Mammoth Cave. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Park Administration and Master's degree in Education. And before becoming a park ranger, Jennifer taught for 9 years in the public school system in Kentucky. So with no further ado, take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Matt. Can everyone hear me okay? I'm hoping. All right. So thank you for that introduction. I am so happy to talk with you all tonight about Mammoth Cave National Park. And it's an introduction to the historic section of Mammoth Cave. It's one of my favorite parts of the cave. And we are going to essentially go on a tour tonight, except it will be virtual using pictures. So our first slide on the left shows the arrowhead, and no matter what national park site you go to, and there are now over 400 sites, all the rangers will be dressed just like me. They're going to have on gray shirts, green pants. If we're outside, we'll have on a flat hat, kind of based off the military. The first park rangers a long time ago were in the military, and so that's why when we're inside, we take off our cover. So that's why I'm not wearing my hat. But that badge there, it represents the shape. It's supposed to be about the natural history you can find in the national parks. You see bison, you see a mountain, a tree, a lake. All of those things are talking about the wildlife and also the nature that you find in the National Park Service. So this is the entrance sign when you drive into Mammoth Cave National Park. And all the big parks, they're going to have signs like that. A lot of people like to stop and take photos. And so this is what it looks like most of the year when it's nice and green outside. You're going to see a snowy picture soon, though. And we're going to go on to the historic entrance. This is a large natural entrance to the cave. And as far as we know, there are 27 different entrances to get into and out of Mammoth Cave. We have over 420 miles of mapped passageway, but it's all in this little area. And so the way I like to think about it is, if you think about your body, I'm only about 5'3", but I have tens of thousands of miles of blood vessels inside my 5'3" body. And so those 420, and who knows how many more miles of passageway, are all underneath just 3 counties in Kentucky. So Mammoth Cave, it doesn't go under Tennessee or Ohio. It doesn't even go an hour from here. It's all underneath Hart, Barron, and Edmonson County, Kentucky. And this opening, it's beautiful. It's quite large. And the visitor center, if you ever get to come here, is just a short walk away, less than half a mile from this pretty opening. Now we are open every day of the year except December 25th, because this is a cool cave fact. No matter what it's like outside, in the cave, it's a constant temperature every day of the year. So Mammoth Cave is right at 54 degrees every single day, even if it's snowy and 5 degrees outside, or if it's August and 100 degrees outside, it is still going to be 54 degrees down inside the cave. And that's because the rocks, they take kind of the average temperature. So if you watched the weather person here in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky on the news every night, and you added up the temperature that they talk about and added it all up for the year, divided by 365 days, temperature is going to be right around 54 degrees. Now, as you walk down into the historic entrance, and that entrance has been used for thousands of years. Once you get down inside the cave, it looks a little different now than it did a few thousand years ago. And that's because we now have bat gates on all of the entrances that we know of. And we have these bat gates so the animals, the bats, the insects, they can go in and out safely. So it doesn't impede the natural airflow of the cave, but also for safety, so people don't go in and out on their own. When you have over 400 miles of cave, it's not safe to let people go in alone. So the only way you can go inside the Mammoth Cave is if you have a park ranger with you. Now, the reason that I say Mammoth Cave has been known about for thousands of years, that entrance, is because we know that many, many years ago, there were Paleo Indians that used Mammoth Cave. We have found multiple artifacts down inside the cave, and some of those date back as old as 4,000 years. They have found beads, they found bowls made out of gourds, and they found slippers that are woven from grasses that still grow on the surface down by the Green River. So there were people there a long, long time ago. We like to say it was rediscovered more recently, kind of in the late 1700s, but it was known about thousands of years ago. As you walk deeper into the Mammoth Cave, you go through a passageway that's called Houchin's Narrows. And this now, of course, has these nice pavers, and there are handrails, and there are lights in this section of cave. But remember, naturally, caves are completely dark once you get past that entrance. You can't even see your hands in front of your face if you wiggle them around when the lights are off. So we have changed that, putting the lights in. And this is one of my favorite rooms in the cave because it's so cool looking. This is called the Rotunda. It's a very large room. You could probably put a house in here. It's pretty big. It has this round ceiling. And when I was a little kid, you all heard Matt say that I came here on my 4th grade field trip and fell in love with this place. And I thought the ceiling was round. I imagined water swirling around and making that ceiling. But now I know Mammoth Cave, it's a solutional cave. So it was formed by weathering and erosion. Water is what carved out Mammoth Cave. But that water was actually a river that was flowing through here long ago, carving out this passageway that you can see here. And what happened is, over time, those river waters, they went down lower in the rock layers, and they started carving out more passageways. And so this was empty. And as it dried out, kind of like how when your lips in the wintertime, maybe they start to get dried out and they crack. And that's what happened here. So as this passageway dried out over time, the unstable rock, it fell. And so this is what we call a breakout dome. This big round area is a breakout dome. And you can notice on the sides, there are some big rocks. And those are the rocks that were unstable and fell a long, long time ago before any of us were around. And over the years, they've piled those up on the side, so they have nice pathways to go through here. Now, in this room is actually one of the reasons that we are now a national park. When we became a national park in 1941, they didn't know that Mammoth Cave was 400 plus miles long. They didn't know we were the longest cave in the world. But people did know that we had a really, really rich history. You see, not only were there people inside Mammoth Cave thousands of years ago, but there's been a lot of really neat things that have happened over the past few hundred years. Lots of amazing exploration. What you see in front of you here, these are actually relics from the early 1800s. So when the War of 1812 was happening, Britain blockaded our ports, and so we could no longer buy gunpowder from the British West Indies. They're not going to sell you that when they're fighting with you. And so the people here in Kentucky, they started to make their own gunpowder to help with the War of 1812. They built these boxes that you see here, and these are actually from 1810, 1811. These have been here a long time. Over 200 years they've sat inside the cave, and the cave is kind of like a big refrigerator. It keeps the same temperature, and so as long as you don't bother things and get kind of germs on them, bacteria, it stays pretty much the same. So these hoppers, these boxes, were built in the early 1800s, and during the War of 1812, the people that were working here, they didn't have their freedom. So we're this young nation, and we're trying to keep our freedom as the United States of America. But the people who did all of this work, they were actually enslaved African Americans. So they were brought here to the cave, and they were forced to work day in and day night at all day, at this mining operation. It's kind of crazy when you think about that they didn't have that choice, even though they were trying to help people keep their freedom when they didn't have any. And so they would have been working here. It's kind of like a coffee pot is a good way to think about it. You put the dirt into these boxes, and then water was brought in, and the water would trickle down over the dirt, and the dirt has a lot of nitrates, a lot of nitrogen in it. And as the water trickled down, that nitrogen rich water would end up down in the bottom, down here, in these little trough areas, and they called that niter beer. And that niter beer would have been pumped. Somebody would have been standing over and over at this pump that used to be down here on a pump stand. And they would pump that niter beer up to the surface, where they would add some other ingredients, boil it down, and eventually that saltpeter, what they ended up with, they would ship up the East Coast to this young chemist by the name of Dr. DuPont. His company is still around. And they would actually turn it into the gunpowder that was used for the War of 1812. So this operation went on for a few years. Now, when the war was over in 1815, it was cheaper to just get gunpowder somewhere else. So they quit doing that. But at that point, that's when the owners decided they were going to open the cave up for tourism. And so since 1816, for over 200 years, people have been coming to Mammoth Cave to go on cave tours every day. Even during like the Civil War, we were open. We know that there were people from both sides of the war that came here and visited, because there are signatures in the cave, and also the hotel, the old hotel records tell us things like that. So we're going to walk a little deeper in the cave, and here are some of those pipes where they would bring in the water for the saltpeter mining operation, and also where they would take and pump and send that niter beer out. These are actually tree trunks. There wasn't any type of home improvement store back in the 1800s. And so they would cut the trees down, and they would hollow them out using a hand tool called a spoon bit auger. And two people would work and hollow that out, and then they would whittle them down on the ends and put them together, kind of like kids do soda straws. And that's how they would get that in and out of the cave. And once again, every bit of this you see here, this is original. It's been there over 200 years. Not all of it is there. When the tours began, there wasn't electricity back in 1816. And so I think probably some of the things were torn down and used for handrails, or maybe they were even used to have fires so they could have light inside the cave. But there's a lot of those relics left from the early 1800s. Going a little deeper into the cave, this is an area called the church, and the rock right in the center is actually where a long time ago a minister would stand at, and probably the first air-conditioned church services that ever existed. Of course, there wasn't air conditioning back in the early 1800s, but we do know that some of the local people would hold church services down inside the cave, because we've heard about that. Back in the olden days, there was no social media like we have nowadays. So what people would do is they would write letters to each other. And sometimes people would write an article for their newspaper after they returned home from their visit to Mammoth Cave back in the early 1800s. And in our archive building, we have lots and lots of old letters and old articles that were written right around 200 years ago. So we know a lot about those early visitors, and we know that there were church services here in the early 1800s. This is just another picture of that area. As you walk farther into the cave, at this point, you're over a half a mile inside the cave. We would have been walking for about 30 minutes if you were here, and you see more of those vats, those pits where they used to put the nitrogen-rich dirt. That process went almost a mile into the cave. And a little bit farther, and we're going to take a side trip. This is one of the cool things about doing this virtually. If you were here, we would not get to go up that set of stairs. That's a totally different cave tour. But we're going up there today because there's some really, really cool things up in this passageway that I want to show you all. This is called Booth's Amphitheater, and it was named after a young actor. You all may have heard of John Wilkes Booth. He's the gentleman who assassinated President Lincoln. But he had a brother named Edwin Booth, who was a very, very famous actor. And Edwin Booth came here to Mammoth Cave, and he actually gave a soliloquy from Hamlet, to be or not to be. He sort of stood in this area right up here, and the whole tour watched him do that. And so this part of the cave is called Booth's Amphitheater. So we're going to walk up there, and this is what I wanted to show you. These signatures we now call historic graffiti, but they are around 200 years old. Let's see if we can find some numbers. Here is an 1820 something. So that one is right at 200 years old. I can't tell what the last number is, maybe 1825. Here's an 1827, so almost 200 years old. And if you look really closely at these signatures, it's little individual dots of soot. This is called candle smoke writing. And remember, the first guides were actually those people that had been working here, those individuals that were enslaved. They didn't have their freedom. And so after the mining operation was over, they had to give cave tours. But they could take their tips if they made any tips. And so they would ask the visitors, would you like to write your name on the ceiling? For just a small amount of money, I'll give you this candle here, and you can use it to write your name on the ceiling. And so that is why we have all this historic graffiti. And all of it is from very long ago. It's been illegal to write your name anywhere in the cave since we became a national park in 1941. Part of our job as park rangers, it's the mission of the Park Service to protect and preserve the park. So all of the signatures are quite old, but kind of neat to see these really cool old signatures from the early 1800s. Down below, you'll notice some formations. The ones hanging down are called stalactites. The one coming from the floor are stalagmites. You might trip over them. And these are holding tight to the ceiling. And when they meet in the middle, you call it a column or a pillar. And these are all just calcite formations. They are made out of the same thing as a piece of limestone rock that you find out maybe in a driveway. They have just been redeposited in a prettier way. So we're gonna head back out to the main section we call Broadway, back into Main Cave. And we're gonna take another little side trip from a different tour. This is from the Violet City Lantern Tour, but I love showing this because I find it fascinating to think that there was a hospital inside a cave. So a long time ago, there was a doctor. I call him Dr. Krogan. Some people pronounce it Dr. Cron. But he came here to Mammoth Cave, and he actually purchased the land and the cave, and he built a hotel, and he was a physician, a medical doctor. And he decided to build some huts kind of like a hospital down inside the cave, because he thought that the cave air and those temperatures might help people who had consumption. That's what they called tuberculosis or TB back in the early 1800s. And so Dr. Croghan built a few of these buildings down inside the cave, and for almost 1 year, there was an experiment. We call it the tuberculosis or the consumption experiment. And there were people from across the United States. I know that there were people from as far away as New York State that moved here because they were sick with consumption, and they were hoping that this hospital inside the Mammoth Cave would cure them, would make them feel better. It was not a success, but that's how science, that's how medicine works. They do experiments and they learn from it. It actually wasn't so great because they had fires going to keep themselves warm, to cook on. And so they were breathing in that soot, and they were in the cave all the time with no sunlight. Dr. Croghan actually ended up, he caught tuberculosis as well. He passed away. So it wasn't a successful experiment, but it is interesting to think that this was down inside the cave. And there are still 2 of these stone buildings that are almost 200 years old down inside the Mammoth Cave. So if you come and go on that Violet City Lantern tour someday, you can see the building down inside the cave. Now, after Dr. Croghan passed away, one of the young men, Stephen Bishop, that worked for him, one of those enslaved people, he actually became a free person because part of the will for Dr. Croghan was that Stephen and other people, they were going to be able to have their freedom. And Stephen, I think, is probably the most fascinating guy that ever worked at Mammoth Cave. He never had any formal education. He wasn't allowed to go to school, but he was way smarter than me. Stephen Bishop could speak multiple languages. His handwriting is beautiful. It's like calligraphy. I have super messy handwriting. And also he drew from memory a map of the Mammoth Cave. And nowadays we have all this fancy GIS mapping system that can be done in a computer. You can lay his map that he drew almost 200 years ago down on top of a modern day map. And it's amazing to see how accurate he was with just memory and walking through and being able to design this map. Stephen learned from the visitors, and he was requested by famous people from all over the world that would come here and want to have this amazing guide, Stephen Bishop, take them on their cave tour. And I'm sure maybe some of you all love to read like me. And so if you're interested in reading about Stephen Bishop, there are some really good books about him. They're historical fiction, but they are based on the facts that we know about his life. So I'll tell you about some of those later if you'd like. And maybe you guys can check those out if the library has them or find them. They're very good books. So I'm pretty fascinated by Stephen. And
I will see if they, if we actually have any. If you can email me some of those, maybe I can post that on our Facebook page or something like that.
Yeah,
that'd be neat to see and read.
Yes, there's some good books. And when Stephen passed away, he's actually buried here at the park, right above, not far off from the cave entrance. At the cemetery, you can kind of look over and see the big entrance that you all saw earlier, that big sinkhole entrance. But after he had his freedom, he stayed here and he kept giving cave tours. So I think he's kind of like me. I think he loved Mammoth Cave. Him and his wife bought some land. They were property owners, and he kept on giving cave tours. So pretty cool guy to read about. What we're getting ready to see behind the giant's coffin in just a moment, he is the person that discovered the miles that we're getting ready to see. So this is called the giant's coffin. In Stephen's day, they would have called it Steamboat Rock or Steamship Rock. Nowadays, we think it looks kind of like a giant coffin. We're going to go behind that down to a lower level of the cave. We're going even deeper. These are called the steps of time. And then we're going to look down into a pit. There are a lot of pits inside Mammoth Cave. There's a big pit a lot of people have heard of called the bottomless pit. And in the 1800s, Stephen Bishop was the first person to cross the bottomless pit. There was a visitor named Mr. Stevenson who came here on a cave tour, and he asked Stephen if he could take him somewhere that no one else had ever been. And so we're not sure if it was a ladder or maybe a big long tree branch, but we do know they put a piece of wood of some sort across the bottomless pit, and they put lanterns between their teeth, and they skirted across and went past the bottomless pit to see what we're getting ready to see in the next few slides. So when you see a pit inside a cave, that means it's a big, deep, vertical drop. You can look down into it. And if you look up, it's called a dome. So we call them pit dome areas. So this one is called side saddle pit because it looks kind of like a lady's side saddle for when you're riding a horse. So after side saddle pit and the bottomless pit, you get to Fat Man's Misery. This is probably the most famous passageway inside Mammoth Cave. Everyone wants to go through Fat Man's Misery. I am not a tiny lady, I'm a big girl. And so when I walk through Fat Man's Misery, I have to turn sideways in a few spots. Now, I've been here 15 years and I have never heard of anyone getting stuck in Fat Man's Misery. But it is a really neat place to walk through. You do kind of have to turn sideways at times if you're a grown-up. You might have to bend down towards the end. If you're, much taller, 5 foot and taller, you're going to be bending down a lot towards the end. But Fat Man's Misery is a very fun passageway. Stephen Bishop called it the winding way because it kind of snakes around like that. When you come out of Fat Man's Misery, you're in an area that we call Great Relief. There are some more of those signatures from the 1800s. There are restrooms, just like at a school or in your house. You can stop and take a bathroom break. There are sinks and toilets and the stalls and doors. It's kind of crazy because you'll be using the restroom. And the big difference in being in a building is when you look up, you see the cave ceiling instead of a normal ceiling. And when you flush the toilet, everything goes up to the surface. There's a pump station that makes everything go up. When you leave Great Relief Hall, you go to the deepest part of the cave that we allow people to go on this tour. So we're going to do a geology lesson since we are down at River Hall. This is where we would take a break. You're over a mile into the cave at this point, and so we would sit on these benches and learn about how Mammoth Cave formed. I told you earlier, Mammoth Cave is a solutional cave, and it was formed by weathering and erosion because an underground river flowed through here to carve it out. That underground river, and there's many of them actually, they are still down inside the deepest levels of Mammoth Cave, carving out more cave. And if you look at this picture, you can almost envision that water flowing through there. I think this looks like golf balls, and the little divots on golf balls, these are called scallops. And they're formed when that river water is flowing through there. The larger the scallops, the slower the water was flowing. In Fat Man's Misery, those scallops are about the size of a dime. That tells us the water was zooming through there. In this room, it was more like a slow river water. These are much larger scallops. And in the next picture, I'm going to take you somewhere really cool that you don't get to go. We're going to go down and see the water. So at this point, if you were here on the real tour, we'd start going up, but we're going on a cool side trip. We're going down to the lowest level to see the river Styx. So inside the Mammoth Cave, there are quite a few underground rivers, and they are as deep as you can go. They are the brand new areas being formed. So Mammoth Cave is formed in layers or levels, and we have 5. The oldest level is way up at the top, closest to the surface. And the newest cave passageway is down on that 5th lowest level, and it is currently forming. And that's what you're seeing right here. That's where the underground rivers are. And this water, this H2O, it is chemically weathering and causing the cave to form. So a long time ago, millions of years ago, during the Mississippian time period, there was a warm, shallow sea that covered kind of where Kentucky is, except we were way down lower back then, below the equator. But anyway, all of that ocean, it left behind layer upon layer upon layer of a whole bunch of crushed up seashells. There's some shark teeth, some fish bones. It's just a bunch of seashells for the most part. And that formed this sedimentary or sedimentary, you can say it either way, rock that we call limestone. Mammoth Cave is completely carved out of limestone rock. And there's hundreds and hundreds of feet of that limestone rock here in this part of Kentucky. Now, after that ocean went away, tectonic plates shifted, things moved around, no more ocean, but we had all that rock. There was some more rock that got laid down, and it's super important as well because it's what helps us have the world's longest cave. This other rock was laid down, and there's less than 100 feet. There's like 60, 70, some places 80 feet of it, and it's called sandstone. And sandstone is another rock that is sedimentary, but it doesn't let water get through it real easy. So we say that the sandstone up on top of Mammoth Cave, that's called the cap rock. We say it's kind of like the roof over our head, or maybe like the hat or your umbrella. It protects the cave and keeps it from collapsing. So it's real important that we have that cool recipe of that sandstone cap rock. But here's our quick geology lesson. Rainwater comes down, and that H2O mixes with carbon dioxide. That's what we exhale when we breathe. The carbon dioxide and the H2O, they make a weak acid called carbonic acid. And carbonic acid is the same thing that you drink in a soda when you drink a pop. And it can give you cavities in your teeth. It can weather away at the enamel. And your teeth are made out of the same thing as limestone. It's a bunch of calcium, what the teeth are made of. But it gives you cavities. And it also gives you a big giant mammoth cave. So what happens is that carbonic acid gets down to the limestone, that calcium rock, that calcium carbonate, and it carves it out. So you need water, you need some carbonic acid, and a whole lot of time, because weathering and erosion, this is a slow process here. This cave, scientists say, has been forming for about 10 million years, and it's still happening. So we're almost done with the cave tour, because after you leave that lower level, this is the not fun part of the tour. Be glad you're at home. There is a giant tower, and it takes a while to walk up this big giant tower. There are over 500 stair steps on this tour, and a whole lot of them are right here at the end. It almost looks like a fire tower. And you walk up that tower, and when you get back up that tower from Mammoth Dome, that's what this is called, you're almost back to the historic entrance. So Stephen Bishop as well, he discovered this area called Mammoth Dome. And for years, for over 100 years, this was the end of the tour, and you had to backtrack and walk all the way back out. And then they built this tower, I think back in like the 1960s is when they built this. So I wanted to show you all some animals that live in the cave, just because it's fun to see them. So we have a few different species, 13 species here in the park of bats. My favorite is called the big-eared, the raffinest bat. They're super cute. Let me get myself a drink real quick. Excuse me. There are cave crayfish down inside the rivers. The things that live deep in the cave, they don't have any pigments. You can see through them. You can see their veins. They don't have eyes. So this crayfish has no eyes whatsoever, the cave crayfish. The fish are also eyeless. Over time, these adaptations occur because there's no reason for them to have eyes, because there's not light deep inside a cave. Their metabolisms are much slower than animals that would be on the surface, like a regular crayfish, because if you live in the cave, you don't get food that much. These animals depend on detritus. That's kind of the leafy stuff that's decaying out in the ditches and the woods that washes in whenever there's flooding. The outside rivers that this cave river empty into, if it floods outside, if we got a lot of rain, that water comes back into the cave. The room with the benches, it floods sometimes, and we have to cancel that tour because it's not safe to go down there because there's water over those benches. So that's a cave crayfish. This is one of the eyeless cave fish. This is a packrat, is what we call them for short. I think they are adorable. And growing up, I was always called a packrat because I like to save and collect things. And packrats, they do that. Here at the park, I have in their midden, M-I-D-D-E-N, that's their nesting area. I have noticed before pacifiers that people have dropped, like when they were packing their young children and the kiddo would drop the Pepsi, the packrat would pick it up. I've also found baby shoes, ponytail holders, all kinds of ponytail holders. They pick those up that people drop. And money. Every once in a while, you'll see like a dollar bill kind of shredded up that somebody's accidentally dropped and the packrat has put it into its nest. Now the cave, we don't know how long it is. It's over 420 miles and there's no end in sight. So all of the work here at Mammoth Cave, all of that mapping, it's done by volunteers. So when you grow up, or you grown-ups that are watching, the people that do that, they're part of an organization and it's called the Cave Research Foundation, the CRF. And they are from all over the United States, from all different walks of life, teachers and doctors and just everybody. If you're interested in caves, maybe you want to be part of the Cave Research Foundation. But they come here on long weekends, like 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and they give up their holidays to go down inside the Mammoth Cave and do exploration. This is a picture, an artist drew this. This is what they think that ocean looked like millions of years ago during that Mississippian time period. And recently we discovered a shark, the cartilage from a very large shark. They think it was about the size of a modern day great white down inside the cave. And so you might have noticed that on the news. It was kind of a big deal. But there are lots of fossilized shark teeth along the rock layers, but also some cool stuff like that cartilage that was found. Here are some examples of fossils. This is inside the cave, and this is called horned coral. There's a lot of this all over. Here's a picture of one of those rangers crawling out of the way. And those are all the slides I have for you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I am going to let you all ask any questions that you might have.
Well, I don't mind getting started a little bit with it. You mentioned the owners of this way back.
Yes.
How many owners were there? Were there any disputes as to, well, I own this part, I own that part, so on? Can you talk about that?
Sure, I can. So back in the late 1700s, when the cave was rediscovered, legend has it there was a gentleman named John Houchins who was out hunting for a bear. He shot at the bear. Some people say the bear chased him. Some people say he chased the bear. But anyway, that's when it was rediscovered, was in the late 1700s. And at that time, the cave was named the last name of whoever owned kind of the land where the main historic entrance is. And I've never heard of anybody kind of fighting over it back in the 1700s or 1800s. It did change hands quite quite a few times in the early 1800s. But once Dr. Croghan purchased the cave, it actually stayed in his family until we became a national park in 1941. So for over 100 years. In his will, and he never got married and he never had children, he left the cave to all of his nieces and nephews. And so because of that, it went through all of them. And then when the government decided in 1926, by the way, is when Congress said, we think we need some more national parks east of the Mississippi, because before that, they were all kind of way out west, like Yellowstone. And so in 1926, Congress said, let's make Mammoth Cave, Shenandoah, and the Great Smoky Mountains be national parks. And so from 26 all the way up to 41, people around here were having their land purchased. Some people donated it, some people it was purchased. Sometimes the government eminent domain occurred and the land was taken because maybe the families didn't want to get rid of the land. But yeah, there weren't really disputes on that main part because Dr. Croghan had it and then his heirs had it all the way up till we became a park. But there have been some really famous disputes. If anybody is interested in reading about that, there's a cave here within the national park. It's not yet connected. It's called Great Onyx Cave. And it was owned by a lady, which I think is really cool. Back in the 1940s and 50s, this young woman owned a cave and ran it. Her name was Miss Lucy Cox. Now, the Park Service, it's now part of the national park since the 60s. But Miss Cox, there was a big land dispute between her and another owner in the area, because he said that she was taking people in her cave, which the entrance was on her property, but she was taking them underneath his property. And she was like, no, we're not. But it was surveyed and she was taking people under his property. And so the judge made her get all of her records together, and she ended up having to pay that gentleman and his family some money because she had been taking people through there. But it was a landmark case. So we have lawyers, we have law schools that come here and bring their students and they go on that cave tour. Because it is a landmark case. It went way up high federal courts, and it was decided that whatever you own on the surface, you own all the way to the center of the earth. And it's because of that case. So it's pretty famous, and I'm sure that's used in cases in courts. And we do have, every year there's some schools that bring their law students down here and they go on that cave tour.
Wow. You mentioned at one point, people living there. Did you find or have stories of people actually living in the caves, not on, like you're talking about, but actually living in them?
No, we do not think historically that those Paleo Indians that were here thousands of years ago, that they actually lived in the cave. They just used the cave. The only time I ever know of anyone spending the night, there's two different cases. The hospital, for about 10 months, there were people living down in there. And then also there was a sleep study about 100 years ago. And they were trying to decide if you were in the dark, if it messed up kind of your circadian rhythm, I think is what it's called.
Yeah.
So they did a sleep study. I think it was in the 1920s. It could have been in the 1930s, but it was almost about 100 years ago. I don't think it was very conclusive, truthfully. But that's the other time I've heard of people sleeping inside the caves.
Wow. I imagine it would be in sleeping bags. I can't see them bringing down cots and things like that.
And it would be cold. 54 degrees is okay when you're walking, but I can't imagine being in there all night at 54.
What about any ghosts?
People do think that the cave is very haunted, and there are quite a few really good books about ghosts inside the Mammoth Cave. So I'll find the names of some of those and send them to you as well.
That would be neat. Yeah. You mentioned a lot of the bats. Have they suddenly come out and scared people, or Do you just see bats just flying around just when you're doing tours?
You normally don't, because they're nocturnal and we do our tours during the daytime. You'll see bats kind of hanging around on the ceiling some, but they normally do not fly around. Occasionally, like every once in a while, maybe once a month when I'm in there, I'll see one flying around. But usually you just see them kind of snoozing.
What about other animals? At least you mentioned about some of the pack rats and everything.
Yeah.
But do all of a sudden you hear somebody scream, something crawling up the leg, or
No.
anything like that?
No, not really. If you're the first few people on a tour, sometimes cave crickets might fall on your hat or onto your head. And you'll hear some people. I usually work with school groups, so you might hear a few kiddos screaming because this giant cave cricket has fell on top of them. But it's usually just the first few people.
Remind me not to do that. That might really scare the heck out of me.
They're nice. They're nice crickets. They don't hurt you.
So, does anyone else have any questions at all?
Yeah, hey, I've got a question.
Yes,
I've been doing some genealogy research, or I have in the past. I haven't done much recently, but I have in the past. And I think I've got relatives from that area. You mentioned the graffiti ceiling wall. Do you have a database or a list of those names that are on there that I can access?
I'm not sure if the list of names is in a public database. Now, I know cemetery wise, there is a database that I can get that information for you for every cemetery in the park. Somebody years ago, I think it's when I first started, I think it was maybe a college student that was doing, I don't know if it was their dissertation or if it was undergrad, but they went in and did photos and were supposed to be coming up with a list of all of the names. And I mean, I think there's thousands of names on the ceiling, but I've never actually seen it. I don't know if that project was finished or not.
Okay, that would be interesting. That would be cool.
I'll ask, but I don't think there's really a final product of that. I know a lot of the rangers that work here, we'll just pick a name and research it, because most of us, we really enjoy researching.
Right.
So I know I don't know what last names, if there's particular last names that you're searching. Is there a name that you know?
It could have been. That's why I was trying to remember once you started talking about, because it's been a couple of years and I'm not too sure which side of the, who it was. I think it could have been the Dunbars.
Right.
It was either Dunbar or Shipman.
Okay.
It was one of those two. I'm pretty sure that was, and I know both of those families came from Kentucky, this area.
Well, if you're interested in the cemetery thing, I think I even have that address on my phone, so I could probably find that internet address for you. Okay, and Laura, thank you, Laura. I hope your kids had fun, and I hope you guys can come someday in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can anyone ask you questions maybe after we hang up? Should I invite them maybe to send you or send them your information? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Feel free to send people my email. It's fine. If they have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm going to send you the names of a few books. And then I'm also going to find for the lady that was just talking with me, I'm going to try to find that website that has all the information for the cemeteries.
Okay, so if anyone does have any further questions, you can just let me know and I'll be glad to pass along the question or pass along Jennifer's contact information. You can ask her directly, so we'll both be available. I also want to point out again that we are recording this, and hopefully in a few days we will get this uploaded to our, I just see the question now, when can we see the replay? Hopefully in a few days, within a few days, and I will make sure that it is posted everywhere on our social media. I think I have your email. But if you want, Krista, please email me, and I can then make sure you do get at least the link, if not the file itself. So we will make it available to you within a few days, to everyone for a few days. So yeah, if anyone else has any questions, again, just feel free to email me and I can give you or pass along Jennifer's information as well.
Yeah, and as far as like, if anybody would like the actual PowerPoint, I have that where it has like even the alt text. I put on here today on all the pictures, little captions and all in case anyone needed that. But I can also send that out if that would be helpful to anyone, if they use a text reader so they can see all that on the photos.
So thank you very much, Stephanie, and so glad to have you, guys, join us and everything. So yeah, if we can get that PowerPoint and everything.
Yeah.
Jennifer, you can stick around for a few moments. If anyone has any, last questions and all that, you are so welcome. Joyce, you and I will definitely talk in the very near future. We've known each other for a very, very long time, so we definitely will chat. But thank you all so much for coming and everything. Thank you, Jennifer, once again, another great presentation. Always learn a lot. It's fascinating.
Thank you.
And
I love this place. I enjoy getting to tell about it.
And while I did check how far it is from Rock Hill to Mammoth Cave, and it's 7.5 hours.
Okay.
If you left right about now and didn't stop.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that takes into account rush hour or not. But it's about 7.5 hours going west, probably northwest a little bit, I think. Not since the direction is lousy. So thank you all again for coming. And be on the lookout for the replay, and feel free to get in touch with me with any questions or comments or suggestions or whatever the case may be. So enjoy the rest of your week and have a great weekend, folks. And I'm turning off the recording right now.
Thank you all.
Thank you.